Cuba is defiant and it is contagious. It's so contagious that the three of us are talking about it. Tiny place of 11 million people. It's so contagious that revolutionaries across Latin America tried to replicate Cuba in their countries. And even though Douglas Bravo, for instance, failed in Venezuela, Douglas Bravo's tradition enters Hugo Chavez's electoral campaign in the 1990s. Even though Hector Behar and others fail in Peru, Hector Behar was for a short time the foreign minister of Pedro Castillo after all those years. So the contagion continues.
Scoop us up like ants in a colony. Organize the wealth into a socialist economy.
Okay, just to get back, this is kind of where I want to get out into the actual more of like the specifics of the book. So Cuba has been made out as a tyrannical dystopia in American media and public opinion. With just a cursory review of Latin American history throughout the Cold War era, we can document extreme instances of human rights abuses such as the Mayan genocide in Guatemala, Colombia's long-standing conflict replete with civilian massacres, Pinochet transforming a football stadium into a makeshift prison/torture chamber, Argentina's dirty war, and the list goes on. During this entire period, the U.S. maintained cordial relations with the aforementioned Pinochet, Rios Montt, Alvaro Uribe, and many others. While I think Cuba has room to improve in respect to human rights, it seems curious that they are embargoed and added to the list of state sponsors of terrorism, and these other nations are not. Can you explain the disparity as to why there is so much of these like extreme instances of human rights abuse throughout Latin America, and for some reason Cuba is the one that is, you know, kind of like being made out to be like this tyrannical dictatorship?
You know, it's interesting. Oh, there was a day when I asked Noam, you know, tell me about your first trip to Cuba. And he started to say in 2004, I went to this conference. And, you know, most of it was he talked a little bit. He said, I don't remember, but I met this guy, Canadian, walked me around the street. And then he said, and I went on national TV. And so I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. What did you talk about? And he said, well, I was interviewed on national TV live by Ricardo Alarcon, who was at the time the head of the National Assembly. And he said, during the conversation with Alarcon, live TV, national TV, it comes into every house in Cuba. You know, Chomsky asked Alarcon about political prisoners and pushed him and said, look, you know, why do you need political prisoners? Freedom of speech, this and Alarcon argued the case, said, look, you know, there are people who want to overthrow the government. They want to work with the foreign powers. We have, you know, enumerated experiences of attacks on Cuba, you know, Bay of Pigs onward, assassination attempts. There are people who are involved in all these things. We can't, you know, how do we deal with them? You know, some of them leave the country, but others don't. And, you know, we got to find a way. So they talked. The point is not the disagreement. The point is that they never cut the feed. They allowed it to go out. And then the next day, Alarcon hosted Chomsky at the National Assembly. And in the National Assembly, Chomsky asks Alarcon the same question. And Alarcon answers in front of all the deputies in the National Assembly. Now, why am I saying this to you? Because this is interesting. It's obviously true if, you know, if an ordinary tourist shows up in Cuba and says, I want to discuss political prisoners, nobody's going to take them seriously. But Chomsky is not an ordinary tourist. I mean, he's an important reference, and they respect him, and so they took it seriously. That's why, you know, when people say, yeah, but you know, when I wanted to talk about it, nobody wanted to talk about it with me. Look, I can show up in New York City and I can walk around saying, hey, listen, I want to talk about Mumia Abu Jamal. Nobody wants to talk to me. But the Speaker of the US House isn't inviting me to the House of Congressional, you know, building to have a conversation about political prisoners. It's just not happening. So it is curious that, you know, people have these ideas. Oh, in Cuba, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about that. You're followed. I mean, that's crazy. You know, it just doesn't happen like that. Firstly, the state doesn't have the capacity to follow everybody. You know, it's not happening. You know, and that's not the point. The point is we have a good example here where you could raise a sensitive question and have a debate and discussion. Pretty, you know, sincere, and that too on national television. This is a man, Noam Chomsky, who's never been on US television, mainstream television, never been invited, not to one channel in all his 95 years, has been invited onto one channel except Democracy Now, which is not on not a legacy mainstream channel, so can't count that. Okay, now in the book, while we were talking, we talked about his trip to Cuba and so on. At one point, I raised the question of how the United States, I said nobody talks about how the US reacted to the coup or the counter revolution in Haiti in 1957,
Mhm.
2 years before the Cuban Revolution. There was another revolution in the Caribbean. Nobody in the United States seemed to react negatively. And so Noam was interested in the comparison, and we discussed the comparison. He knew Haiti quite well. He had written about it, traveled there, and so on. Anyway, so what is the comparison? 1957, there's a coup, a counter revolution in Haiti. Papa Doc Duvalier comes to power, and then his son governs right till the 1980s. For decades, this family governs with an iron fist. They have a death squad that's there that they run. Uh, Everybody knows about it, written about in the U.S. media. Forget pamphlets from small little groups. This was written about in the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times. I found articles everywhere. People acknowledging quite openly that there is, in fact, a death squad operated by the Papa Doc and Baby Doc Duvalier, and Haiti's condition of life deteriorates. Meanwhile, in Cuba, nobody can name the death squad. They don't exist. There are no death squads. There was a revolution in 59. United States from the first day tried to overthrow it. They never tried to overthrow 57 in Haiti. So this comparison tells you all you need to know. It's not a principled issue about human rights. This is not
Exactly.
on principle about human rights. It's about fealty to Washington. Cuba does not want to bend the knee to Washington. Haiti bent the knee to Washington, at least the Duvalier family. They said, "We are at your service." The Cuban Revolution said, "We are at the service of the Cuban people." That's the difference. It's not a principled human rights issue. And anybody who says it's principled, I don't know how they would square that entire list that you recited, all the way from, let's say, Arbenz to Pinochet and beyond. I don't know how they would square this. In fact, they don't. And that's the interesting thing. They don't. They say, let's go back to Haiti. There's a word that had got used a few years ago on social media, whataboutism. When
Mhm.
you talk about X and I say, but what about that? Okay. It's very interesting. There's an actual genealogy of the term whataboutism. Um,
I've heard you talk about
when
it.
yeah, when
Yeah.
the
The
IRA
IRA. Yeah.
made the bombing in England, that was important because when they were accused of killing civilians, they said, "What about the killing of civilians in Belfast?" And British intelligence mobilized this linguistic turn of phrase to basically prevent the IRA from getting away with making an argument saying, "What about what you've done in Belfast?" They're like, focus on the fact that you bombed this pub. We don't want to talk about that. That's whataboutism. So, people will say, focus on Cuba. It's whataboutism to bring in Haiti. It's not whataboutism. I reject whataboutism. I think that's a dumb thing. Comparisons are necessary in human interaction. And the comparison between Haiti and Cuba is a parallel comparison, 57, 59. We're talking principles here. The way a methodology of establishing your principles is by comparison. And that's what I just did.
Well, and actually, I actually have a question regarding Haiti, which this dovetails into because we've actually been focusing on Haiti quite a bit. I know that in your book, you actually cited Damming the Flood by Peter Hallward. And in this book, they quote numerous times Brian Concannon, who we just interviewed. Our previous interview was with Brian Concannon because obviously Haiti's been in the news recently. So your book dedicates an entire section of it is based on Haiti because I know that you said there's parallels and there's actually deeper parallels than the one you just described because both Haiti and Cuba were both punished for setting an example of liberation. Haiti in 1804 with its revolution against slavery, and Cuba for its kind of Cold War revolution in the face of U.S. policy. So like I just have to ask this because we've been studying Haiti a lot. We're actually interviewing Kim Ives later this month as well, who's also quoted in the book numerous times of Haiti Liberté. Um, so in the month or so after you released this book, Haiti and the Haitian people became a hot media topic following the remarks made by Donald Trump during the most recent presidential debate, in which he accused legal Haitian migrants of eating the dogs and eating the cats in Ohio. Can you share your reaction to these statements and the ensuing media frenzy regarding Haiti? Just because you recently wrote like a pretty much essentially a chapter of your book regarding Haiti.
I mean, how does one react to Donald Trump sometimes? He's so captivatingly bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, I must say I enjoy very much watching him speak, because of the bizarreness. I mean, you just have no idea what's coming next. And the way in which he says these things, eating the dogs. I'm sure you saw that thing that musician did where he put music to it. Now I
Yeah.
can't even think about it without eating the dogs, eating the cats. I mean, there was already something musical in the way Trump said that ridiculous statement. I mean, firstly, there's a weird problem here, and it has to do with nutritional history. Um, you know, I get it. I don't want to. I have two dogs and two cats, and it hurts me to imagine eating them. But my dog eats meat,
Yeah.
and so do the cats, and some animal is dying for them and for me to eat, because I also am not a vegan or
Right.
vegetarian, I'm sorry to say. But I mean, like, what's bizarre, Donald? I mean, some people eat dogs, some people eat cats. Not saying that what he's saying is true, but why are you reproducing? You eat McDonald's, man.
Yeah.
Donald, you eat McDonald's. I don't even know what's in McDonald's. I don't know what meat that is. That's his preferred dinner on Sunday or whatever. I
Yeah.
once read an interesting article. This is just old-fashioned racism that you just makes you uncomfortable to even have to discuss it, as a serious topic, which is why I'm sort of dancing around your
No,
question.
that's fine. Yeah.
But at the heart of this is the plain simple fact that the United States, because of its basic understanding of the Mississippi River, has wanted to dominate the Caribbean from the 1700s. There was an idea that if the United States was able to have dominion over Cuba, Haiti, and some other islands, and then this whole project of the Mississippi River could be properly crafted. There's a great book, called The River of Dark Dreams, which we quote in on Cuba, which is about this project by the political economists of the Mississippi River to build, a geography of trade that included the Caribbean. They wanted to basically gobble up Haiti, which is one of the biggest islands in the Caribbean, and Cuba, a very large island in the Caribbean, and have this entire area of enslaved plantation economies. This was a fantasy there from the late 18th century into the early 19th centuries. And when Haiti had its revolution in 1804, long before this, there was an attempt from the beginning to suffocate it because they couldn't tolerate having a defiance against enslavement. And this word defiance is key. We use it a lot in on Cuba.
Mhm.
What is Cuba accused of doing? It's not the human rights problem, because after all, then Haiti, why aren't you bothered with that? I mean, the Haiti hasn't had a elected government in ages. Why aren't you bothered about why do you coup twice, Jean Bertrand Aristide, the only man in history to be coup twice? Why do you coup him twice, if you're so interested in the principle of democracy and human
Democracy.
rights and so on?
Mhm.
So it's not that. What it is defiance. And when Noam first used that word to me, I was like, wow, that's a strong word. He said, no, it's not my word. That word is there in the US documents. And then I went and found it. What the United States really is angry with Cuba for is it defies the United States. That's the first word, defiance. But then it's not that Cuba defies the United States. It's what they worried about with Haiti in 1804. Haiti was defying plantation slavery. That's what the revolution of Toussaint Louverture was in
Hmm.
1804. It was a defiance of plantation slavery. Cuba in 1959 was defying US imperialism. And what the United States, the second word that is used regarding Cuba, but could very well have been in the archives on Haiti, but I've never looked into it. The second word is contagion. United States planners say that defiance of Cuba, we cannot allow it to be contagious. And in fact, they were correct. Cuba is defiant and it is contagious. It's
Hmm.
so contagious that the three of us are talking about it. Tiny place of 11 million people.
Hmm.
It's so contagious that revolutionaries across Latin America tried to replicate Cuba in their countries. And even though Douglas Bravo, for instance, failed in Venezuela, Douglas Bravo's tradition enters Hugo Chavez's electoral campaign in the 1990s. Even though Hector Behar and others fail in Peru, Hector Behar was for a short time the foreign minister of Pedro Castillo after all those years. So the contagion continues. You know, I'm talking to you from Santiago in Chile.
Hmm.
Inside the coalition of Salvador Allende's government, when he wins on the 4th of September 1970, inside that coalition is the Communist Party, hugely influenced by the Cuban Revolution. In fact, after the coup d'etat, when the party creates the Frente Popular, Manuel Rodriguez, trained by the Cubans. So the United States government was correct. Cuba was defiant. That's its crime.
Mm.
And the danger of its crime is that its defiance could become contagious.
Right.
Haiti in 1804 was defiant against plantation slavery, and they had to snuff it so that Haiti would not become contagious. The
Right.
Haitian example wouldn't enter into Mississippi,
Hmm.
wouldn't enter into Louisiana, enter into the Carolinas, Tennessee, so on and so forth, because it could imagine the Haitian example, a painting of Toussaint on the board of a plantation in Alabama. How
Hmm.
scary would that have been?
Hmm.
That contagion need to be destroyed. That's the principle they are working under, not the principle of human rights, but the
Exactly.
principle of maintaining control over resources and people.
Exactly.
We group us up like ants in a colony, organize the wealth into a socialist economy.